What's one truth about leadership that's universal across them all?
From my point of view, it's actually listening. The more that they've listened and learned from what they've been told, the better they usually are at being able to take on the role of a leader.
John, what is the misconception you feel people have about mentoring and coaching?
A, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah.
For what you get out of it. So in other words, if you're not on the same page with that, it's going to mean that a lot of people think this mentoring thing is just a waste of time.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Real Biz Life Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding and life from the Horizon Digital podcast recording studio here in Perth. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer, the founder of Design Studio Perth, and to celebrate the launch of Season 2 of the show, Design Studio Perth is offering all our listeners a free brand discovery. So if you find yourself deeply frustrated with haphazard brand messaging and presentation, use the link in the show notes below to book in a time to have a chat. Now, I have a confession to make. The Real Biz Life Chronicles is on a mission to become one of Australia's leading business podcasts. But in order to do that, we please need your help. So if you do enjoy this episode, we please ask that you like and subscribe to our channels below, or simply share this episode with a fellow business owner who is doing one of the hardest things in the world, building a business. If you've ever felt the pressure of being the one who has to keep it all together, at work, at home, in life, this conversation will feel like a deep exhale. We're diving into how to lead when the stakes are high, how to make clear decisions in the chaos, and why simplicity is often the most powerful strategy in business. You'll learn what it means to lead with calm, to bring clarity to complex situations, and how to anchor your leadership in values that actually mean something. And it's not theory, it's real-world wisdom from someone who's been there in corporate, government, and a small business setting, guiding people and performance through serious transformation. But here's what most people don't know about my guest. Behind the steady voice and strategic brain, he is a deeply loyal husband and devoted father, a man who time and time again puts his own enjoyment aside to show up fully for his family. Right now, he's working with an incredible team at RemSense, a cutting-edge technology company using drone-based data capture and digital twins to transform asset management across complex industrial environments. And I actually had the privilege of having a tour last week to check this amazing business out. He's a gentleman, he's calm, he's kind, and today he's here to share what leadership really looks like from the inside out. John Clegg, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm looking forward to talking about all things everywhere.
Likewise, John. Now, we met through Marcus Procopio, who was also a guest on the show. And I felt like we just connected straight away. So I'm really looking forward to having you on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion further from what we've already had a quick chat about.
Yeah, perhaps for our listeners, John, you'd like to give us a bit of insight into RemSense and how you're working with them.
Well, I originally started with RemSense when I went down to investigate another company in 2008. I, at the time, was working for CCI, and Chamber of Commerce and Industry had a role to help smaller businesses just to look at where they were at the moment, decide with my assistance whether or not they wanted to do certain professional things to grow their business. And when I was there, the fellow said, look, why don't you just duck out the back and have a look at what the guys are doing in the shed out there? I said, what are they? He said, they're into drones. I said, oh, okay, fair enough. I'd had an interest in this because I'd had an audit client at one stage who was doing subsea drone work. Anyway, long and short of it is, what was a company then that was doing drones for military purposes, actually for Malaysia, owned marginally by Australians, but 80% by Malaysians. And they had one of the very first, what we now call quadcopters, and it was basically just shown to me in 2008 when those sorts of devices and what we now see flying around were unheard of.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So my engagement was then to come back later on to find out how it was growing and effectively join that business as an advisor, help them raise capital, work through the management issues that they needed to get involved in to be able to get traction in the market in a new space. only to find that what happens with a lot of this sort of stuff, you think you're in a blue ocean where there's nobody else there, and sure enough, who should come in but other people,
Yeah,
like
of course.
DJI out of China.
Yeah.
And we ended up in a situation where we had developed a technology first off in Australia, which was then replicated with the infrastructure that China was able to provide. But we then moved that into another iteration of what you could do with data gathering, which is what RemSense now is. And it data gathers in a photogrammetry way, photographically, for a whole bunch of purposes which were quite different to what the drone technology was, but was coming out of the involvement, from my point of view, of what is data capture, why is it so important, how do you make use of it?
Yeah.
And when I tell you that I'm an accountant, to actually do that transitioning was quite interesting.
It would have been. So you're accountant by trade?
I'm a chartered accountant.
Right.
I originally came out of the auditing world. So my background was 16 years, including partner role at what was the predecessor to Arthur Young. Arthur Young moved then into becoming Ernst & Young.
Yes.
Which is a brand that you now know.
And John, I was so impressed last week with, what you guys are doing there. The the guys you have working on the technology, and I think it was one of the gentlemen who was working on like a 3D plane, was it? And he was actually building up the actual graphic itself. Was that actual footage from a drone that he was working on?
No, it wasn't drone. That was actually taken from what we use as other types of technology to gather the pictures of what is a facility inside a piece of infrastructure, such as a platform, drill platform, or piece of equipment that's on the ground, with a view to giving you a complete walkthrough experience as if you were there, as if you were actually on the situation. Now, in that particular case, we're doing it for a particular extended purpose, and what he was having to do was take, as you saw, multiple photographs and then do some auditing, editing, whatever you want to call it, of what he had. And Sean was doing an amazing job of fixing and making this thing such a useful tool that will be used ultimately by Chevron for its ability to be able to look at its facility.
Yeah, and I think people fully underestimate what you guys are doing in terms of the drone footage, in terms of the skill set required. I think it was Rudy, is that correct? He's been with the company... Rory, sorry, I have a Rudy. He's been with the company for, was it 15 years, 16 years?
He has been there for at least 10 years.
Yeah. And
I met him back when he was a graduate, having come out of electrical engineering from memory. Rory's going to cut my head off.
I just called him Rudy.
But Rory has been one of the foremost involved in all of the development using our AI capabilities now to take data and make it so meaningful for clients.
Yeah. John, I have to say, I love your shirt. Is there a bit of a story around it?
Well, you know what we talk about when people sort of say you're in shark-infested waters.
Yes.
Well, my grandson thinks that these are sharks. They're actually the nearest thing to piranhas. But the point about it is I love wearing this sort of thing because it just changes people's attitude immediately. I was walking down here today. It was fascinating. The number of people looked as much as sort of say, why in God's name would you wear a shirt like that?
Yeah.
But there is a story about sharks, which we'll talk about another time.
Yeah.
Later.
You can talk about it now if you like, or...
I'm a great believer that you have to take opportunity when it comes up. And I use this little story just to explain to people how important it is to basically walk forward rather than backwards.
Yeah.
Right. So my history was I was one of the few people that I know of who at age less than 6 months was put on a ship and taken from England to the West Indies.
Yeah, right.
Okay. I'm saying that the uniqueness of that was that I've had amazing travel experiences, lived in Jamaica for many, many years. And we used to go to the north coast of Jamaica for holiday spins of maybe a few days, might be a week. We were at this particular place when I was about 6. I was walking with my mother down to the end of a jetty. It was an unusual jetty because it was privately owned, and it had things around the side which were effectively ponds, a captured pond of water. and in them were various fish. And I was asked by my mother to, John, would you mind going back to the house, just get my cigarettes that are in such and such a drawer in the bedroom? And I'm getting these instructions as I'm walking backwards.
Yeah, right.
And walk backwards into a pond,
Oh,
5 sharks, and basically they got me out quite quickly. But it taught me a little bit of a lesson that walking backwards is probably something that you try not to do very often,
completely.
particularly as I experienced that occasion. So I have this wonderful story that I share with people about sharks, that I actually did all this before Dr. No was ever filmed. But they never asked me if I would be interested in be a part of that film.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
So it's
glad.
very, very disappointing.
I'm
Very
glad you made it
disappointing.
out. I think you've highlighted something really important there, though, that to always move forward. And today I have to say you're the first guest where we've had our lighting properly set up, because I was over my steel wool hair look. And
Well, you look fantastic from here.
Thank you. Thank you. It must be this big light that we've got going here. But just the importance of constantly every day showing up, stepping forward, instead of slipping backwards into a downward spiral. I think it's really important that you've mentioned that, because I think as business owners, we can sometimes get so caught up in our own head that we kind of, forget that important step.
We don't always have positivity. We don't always have not the need to think backwards.
Yeah.
And if you understand that my history was auditing was always looking back historically
Yeah.
to get up to a point and be in a position where you could say, that's right. The challenge with that was it was not forward looking from my perspective, because it typically was, you've done that job, you've signed the accounts off, and I'll see you in 12 months' time or 6 months' time or something. So having been a part of a family that was always on the move, my father was, after the war came over and he came back and he said, I can't go banking again in England. I've got to do something else. So let's go travelling. So we ended up going with the British government to Jamaica. From Jamaica, we went to Singapore. From Singapore, we went to England occasionally. Then we went back to Jamaica. I'd always been moving around. And from my point of view, as I was growing up, I always felt it was forward development. Every place that I went to, I learned so much about culture, how to deal with people, because it was just in the nature of the way things were in those countries at the time. And I'm talking back in the 50s. So, it gives you some idea that I'm not a spring chicken. But point about it is it was always forward moving. And my dad was always forward moving and developing other people, a trait which I found in my later years was something that I really enjoyed doing as my style. My role as an audit partner was supplemented with being the staff partner, which was all about developing our team.
Yeah.
And for me, I learned that you do a certain amount of work, but the people that do most of the work are your team, and you have to have those people as much as possible 100% better than you are.
Yeah. Do you think that certain people that we meet in life can sort of lead us off track, or do you feel like kind of everyone you meet, even though they might feel wrong, kind of pushes you forward in some way?
Sorry, meaning in what way?
So
give me an idea what you've
Can you
got.
meet like certain people in your life where it might feel like they maybe holding you back or pulling you back in certain ways, but in hindsight, they're actually propelling you forward? I hope that makes sense.
Yes, I know exactly.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I was in that situation when I made the decision to transition out of partnership
sure.
after 16 years, because the environment of a partnership is that, yes, supposedly everyone is equal, but in fact they're not.
Yeah,
And in this particular situation, I reached a point where I was wanting to do things that were, from many people's perspective, outlandish. Back in 1984, 85, Perth was quite unique. We created what was at that stage called the junior board of the stock exchange,
okay.
which enabled you to start listing companies that were not at the maturity that we now do. So the small board of what we did then was unique. I was involved in startup companies that enabled us to be able to put them onto the stock exchange.
Right.
My feeling was that we're doing all this work for these people. We're getting them up to the point where they're listed. We take a fee and walk away. And I kept on feeling I'd prefer to be participating with them staying with them, helping them in the journey. That is not what an accounting services or an accounting practice can typically accommodate.
Yeah.
So you get to a stage and Tracy, you feel in yourself, either I'm going to have to change or I'm just going to get continually more and more frustrated.
Yeah.
And I reached that tipping point, and it was driven, amongst other things, by attitudinal partners saying, you're not going to be able to make a long-term career here if you keep pursuing that desire. Okay, you just told me what I need to do.
Yeah.
So 86, I decided to move out and do what my father said, you are absolutely stupid. How can you possibly leave something like a partnership role?
Yes.
So you're not only getting pusher from people saying we can't do this, but you then turn around and find you've got people that were your mentors and at the family level saying, are you off your rocker?
Yeah. It's quite challenging because I had that when I left my job as well. And again, I think I'd reached that tipping point. And it wasn't my employer. I think I just always had this thing where I wanted to have my own business. And every 2 years I had this pattern whereby I'd get, extremely bored or just over being used and abused in my workplace. And I just asked for a sign, got the sign 2 weeks later, and I just said, I'm done, like off I'm going. And it was interesting. I love my family dearly, but again, it was kind of like, but what about maternity leave and like, all that sort of normal stuff. And I'm like, I'm not staying around for a baby that might not even happen. And to be honest, it's been one of the best experiences of my life. I think it's given me a personal growth journey like no one's.
Did you find it tougher going in the earlier stages of it, though, in hitting things that you hadn't quite expected?
How do you mean? Like,
so you get people sort of say, you do that, it's all right, we're with you, we'll help you, and then suddenly find that it's actually not quite as easy as getting.
Completely. Yeah. And I think what kind of shocked me the most is sometimes those that are nearest and dearest to us as well, like they say they're going to hold space and support you, but then I think it scares them when you reach a certain level of growth that they didn't think you'd ever get to. And I think that freaks them out in some ways as well. So yeah, it's been an absolute eye-opener on every single level, but I don't think I'd ever have it any other way. Like it's really been life-changing.
I think the biggest thing that I hit was identifying with the fact that I'd come out of this big organisation, big brand name, I'd been a somebody, and suddenly I became basically nobody. Yeah. I was a small fish, very large pond. It's one of the challenges that I've talked to you or mentioned to you about my concern about military.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think we don't understand is how the transitioning for people who've been in military and had this amazing relationship of status suddenly hit Civvy Street and find that nobody even wants to acknowledge who they've been, what they've done, where they stand. It's a major problem for them, and it's a major opportunity from my point of view to say to people, look, when you hear somebody has military veterans experience and all the rest of it, do talk to them and recognise that they are going through this whole exercise of coming out of what was PIPs and
part of their identity.
And now into Civvy Street. It's very challenging.
Yeah, I've heard the same from the guys who've been part of the police force. They say 20 years of their life they've given to the force, and they come out on the other side and they, there's that camaraderie and that side that's there, and then suddenly they are in the world and they have no idea where to sort of take things.
Yeah, it's a global issue. They're dealing with veterans from those sorts of disciplined areas, and I don't believe, as a general rule, they get treated well at all.
No.
It's a passion of mine to watch for people that are having a charge to try and change that, to support them. And I've been a very staunch advocate of Heston Russell, who some people will know went through a tremendously difficult time when he was accused of doing things by the ABC, and he had to fight like tooth and nail before he could get a situation resolved. And the ABC still to this day have never acknowledged that they did the wrong thing. Yeah. Sure, they've paid him up and he has come out of it the other side, but for a lot of people, they would have been destroyed by what the ABC did.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, but I just have to make it a clear point, that we as others have got a responsibility to those people that protect us and go out and do things that most of us won't do, can't do. We need to be in a situation where we give them a lot more respect.
I agree. John, you've worked across corporate, government, and small business. What's one truth about leadership that's universal across them all?
From my point of view, it's actually listening. And a lot of good leaders do far, far more listening because they've recognized they've got two ears and one mouth.
Yeah.
And the more that they've listened and learned from what they've been told, the better they usually are at being able to take on the role of a leader. I have a classic story of one of my mentors, Peter Fitzpatrick, who mentored me during the time when I'd come out of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry as a business leader with a view to ultimately going in to do what he was doing, which was with an organization that was really doing excellent work. And Peter said to me at one stage, you know, what I did always is I got to know all of my people in my time as a lieutenant colonel in the SAS. He said, I knew everything about them, their names, their wives' names, and their kids' names. And he said, I made sure that it was part of my intensively focused agenda to have that always available whenever I could talk to anybody. And I've never forgotten it because I've thought, you know, if there's one way that you can be sure that people will listen to you is when they actually know that you've listened to them and you've remembered what was important to them, because family is, for most people, a very critical aspect of their lives.
Yeah. And as a manager or as a business owner, do you think one can sometimes cross the line though? Like, you know, there's an expression that says don't sort of drink with the sailors. Do you think there's truth in that? Or do you think it's important to have that sort of more personal approach with your team?
Look, there are times when you do have to be prepared to stand away. And I was on secondment in Sydney. And Sydney is a very interesting place. As a chartered accountant in Sydney in a big office, you had all people that would typically on a Friday night go down to the TAF downstairs, right? And I remember the partner I was working with over there saying to me, listen, John, by all means, go and join them, do it, have a great time. After an hour, leave.
Oh, okay.
Because he said what will happen is that they will see you as being somebody that we can now suddenly unburden a lot of things. And if you're not careful, you'll end up getting involved in things that are really not what you should be getting involved in that environment, and perhaps making statements that you wish you didn't make out until afterwards. So yes, there is a point sometimes where you just have to sort of mentally think, okay, time out now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important though, particularly if you're doing one-to-one, and I've done one-to-one coaching, that is a very different environment.
Yeah.
Because in that situation, you're wanting them to actually give you everything.
Of course.
Because then you can work through with them, what do they have to look at changing if they're going to progress? And that can be the fact that they've transitioned into a role of leadership that they're uncomfortable with, because suddenly I've realized that I'm actually the one who has to sign off on everything. It's like you know, at the end of the day, it's your baby.
Yeah.
And what are the things that are giving you heartache, heartburn, or mental issues? Put them on the table with your coach or your mentor.
Yes.
And work through. Now, if it's a coach, he's going to tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
If he's a mentor, he typically should be actually making you look at it and come up with a solution that you want to do, and you can guide. Yeah. But you're actually wanting them. It's quite a different situation. A lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, different approach.
The different approaches, coach and mentor. And Tracy, that is important because, as I say, if you are going to do that, you need to know what, in my view, is important, and that is that there is the yin and yang. In other words, you need to know what's going on in your business, and you need to know what's going on in their personal lives. Yeah. If you don't have those two understandings, it's quite difficult to mentor.
Of course.
In my view.
It would be. That was more for teams. So like as a business owner and a manager, you know, having that sort of relationship with your team. But in terms of coaching, oh my gosh, and mentoring, I think, you have to be open and willing to share, because otherwise there's no way that that person, advisor, mentor can help you grow in that situation. John, what is the misconception you feel people have about mentoring and coaching?
That it's going to be it's going to be expensive
Yeah.
for what you get out of it,
Yeah.
right? That's probably the first hurdle. The fact of the matter is that it's also something that has to be a situation where both people mutually have a determination as to what they want to achieve and what the mentor is prepared to help them achieve. So in other words, if you're not on the same page with that, it's going to mean that a lot of people think this mentoring thing is just a waste of time.
Yeah.
Okay. It is not, it's not for everyone. I think that people need to recognize that mentoring is also a big learning exercise for the mentor. I got more out of mentoring businesses when I was at CCI, where the program was basically to walk in with having had experience and looking at a business and saying to that person, now, what can I help you with to make your business better, right? And the thing about it was that, yes, there are some fundamentals that you could easily sort of walk people through and say, well, we need to talk about succession, for example, as to who's going to take over and all the rest of it. But the thing that you learn is that, in fact, almost the first thing that you need to get them to be prepared to understand your interest is to say to them, so tell me, what's front of mind at the moment? What do you mean, what's front of mind? I said, well, I've come in to see you and you're thinking that I'm here to talk about your business, the numbers and all the rest of it. But actually, what's front of mind right now when you came in today? Oh, well, I've got to get on the phone to talk to somebody because he doesn't understand really what I put forward to him. And you suddenly get a conversation going as to what is critical in the moment and being in a situation where you are working with them on things that are real.
Yeah.
Once people understand that you want to talk to them and work with them on things that are real, the whole situation I've always found has been a different journey. Yeah. I did about 50 different companies in a 4-year period.
Gee.
And I did probably another 100 where we didn't decide to go further, but we had at least the first stage discussion. And invariably it started with, from my approach, so can we just talk about front of mind?
Yeah. I'm having a laugh because I meet with my mentor or advisor every Friday and I'm like, right, I'm going to have my list and I'm going to talk about X, Y, Z and this is the plan. And then I get there and it somehow becomes this conversation that I had no idea that I so desperately needed. And it was, yes, we touched on my stuff on my list, but that's when I look at it, after I've had the session, it's just like what I needed to speak about or what Paul brought up was so much what I needed to hear and have that conversation. So it's really important because, like you say, it's kind of like real life situations that are happening then and there, not my list of 25 things that are future stuff.
Well, and they're often the things that they're often the detailed things that you have to be going through and doing, which doesn't mean you can stand up and get up into the helicopter and look down and sort of say, well, how are we actually going at the moment? Well, we've moved from there, we've got this, we've got that, we've got, actually we're not doing too badly. It would be nice if we had a bit more work, but where are we? We've repositioned. We're now in a different place.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, is where a good mentor can really help. And what I found as a person doing it and learning about it is trying to work out very quickly, what is the nature of the individual that I'm dealing with? Is he an engineer? Is he a strategic thinker? Is he somebody who is very, very much across wanting to do everything himself? So you're dealing with, if you like, all the different variables of the type of people who've come into business ownership.
Yeah.
Some of them have done the training first and gone through and walked through cadetships and all the rest of it. Others have been on the tools. They've decided they want to do this. And now suddenly we're running our own business. I didn't expect it, John, but I've actually got 50 people here. How did that all happen? And with that goes, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and I'm frustrated because they're not getting what I'm really wanting to do. Have to stand back.
Yeah.
Get people to stand back.
John, how do you define a good decision?
Good decision, from my perspective, is one that I have sat down in some cases had to do quite quickly, but it's been driven by the need to fix something that is going to be major consequential
Right.
rather than necessarily sit back and say, I'll give it some thought and come back. Because the decision-making process from my perspective is a bit like in a warfare situation. In some cases, you have no time to make a decision as to what you're going to do.
No.
You have to act.
Mm.
In other situations, you can sit back and plan and say, righto, these are the resources I'm going to need. Bang, that's that. So it's a bit tricky, Tracy, talking about decision-making without it being looked at in the moment as to what is it that has come up that requires that decision to be made. And invariably, from my point of view, what I find I'm doing is I'm pulling from a brain stack of experience of having had something similar and making a decision that is very often linked to, I've been there once before. And your brain has got the subconscious has an incredible capacity to do that. And you don't understand why. And then you're saying, oh, that's right. 20 years ago, we did this, and it was, it is exactly that. So you are in a position sometimes, but the danger with it is that what you do when sometimes that is you haven't got the new nuances that are around you. And that's not every decision is right. Not every decision you make is right.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well. I guess always like a lesson on the other side, right?
Well, I think there is, if you think about it, there's a 50-50 chance that you're right.
Yeah.
But I do use that model from time to time with people, and I say to them, look, think back to what have you done, where have you been in a similar situation to where you're dealing with a matter now, and they can invariably pull out an experience. So, as I say, the brain, I call them folders. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, and I'm just, oh, that's right, that's how we managed it. Zip back in again.
Yeah.
So that would be an answer for you, maybe.
Yeah. And John, if someone's feeling overwhelmed with lots and lots of options, because as business owners, there's so many things we have to think about and make decisions on. If someone is feeling overwhelmed, where do you recommend that they start?
Do a SWOT analysis.
Okay. For our listeners, do you mind to walk through what that is, please?
SWOT analysis being strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Because if you're looking at a situation where something is being put forward to be an initiative, what you need to do is say, okay, that's the opportunity as it's being put. Now, are there any features to it? Okay, right. Now, then work out, okay, what are the strengths with what I've got to be able to match that? So you end up, if you like, with a scoreboard of very strong, moderate, very strong, moderate, very strong, moderate, of the strengths about doing that particular task, the weaknesses that you've got to be able to see that this thing can be seen through. And then the threats, well, if I don't do it, what are the impacts going to be? Or if I do it, what are the impacts going to be? So it's an evaluation process that I use quite subconsciously whenever something is thrown at me. And I suppose it's partly because of an auditing accounting background where you, by nature, are looking for various things in analysis of a company, its position, what it's traded at, why did it trade that way, where does it need to go if it's going to keep going, if it's going to make headway, where is management taking it? Are they, in fact, evaluating their threats and their risks? So risk at the moment, from my perspective, is that with technologies coming down the track as fast as they are doing, management and leadership are not fully engaging with what those technologies can help them with and what they can de-risk their position. It's particularly important in things such as insurance, where, the insurers these days are looking at every which way, if there's a claim, to find a excuse or something that's occurred to mean that they can pass the claim risk obligation back to you to be in a position where well, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. Now, we're finding that particularly in the work that we're doing in our world at RemSense, because we're giving people tools that are enabling them to do checks, matching, doing all sorts of things, which now change the dynamic. A change of dynamic is significant. And that then impacts not only the risk shifting, but it also shifts the risk for people as directors, because they need to be aware that what they've been able to get away with in the past is maybe no longer quite as readily available to them.
Sure.
Because the new tools that we've got can make the task of managing a business and making sure it is safe and that people are working in an environment which is not going to cause a problem, much more an issue for them as directors, even if they are only independent directors, not part of day-to-day leadership.
Yeah.
They could no longer just pass the buck and sort of say, well, we were told that everything was fine. Are you asking the question, what are we doing to make sure that we are doing things in the best possible way, particularly for our people and for exposure to any risks of health, safety and things of that nature? Much more important now than it probably was 15 years ago.
Yeah. John, can you share a time when simplifying a complex issue led to a breakthrough for a client or for yourself?
Complex issue that I've experienced. Okay.
Maybe one for yourself, if you have it to share.
I think probably the biggest and complex issue that I've probably had to face is watching an organization going through transitioning and finding that what you think is the right way to go is not accepted, and you agonize over it. You do the best you can and you take it to a certain stage, and then you have to walk away from it. And walking away is something that you feel very edgy about doing, particularly if you've got investment at stake of reputation, being involved in its getting to the point where it is at the moment, or even financial. And the issue that you have is that if you brought somebody else into that, which I had on the occasion of what was the precursor to RemSense, I felt very, very difficult, because what I had done is brought a colleague in to help me rescue a company, put a lot of money up of his, and then basically was reliant on me to make sure that we got this thing done right.
Sure.
Fortunately, the great thing about it was that the individual concerned and I had this belief that you have a business relationship and you have a friendship relationship. The two must be kept separate. So when I went to him and said, look, we need to think about helping somebody who has an opportunity, he said, okay, well, we're going to have to do this, and this. This is where you're going to have to do, blah, blah, blah. It was all business.
Yeah.
And the fact that things started to get very wobbly, I felt was going to impact the friendship.
You would think so, yeah.
It didn't.
Great.
Because we'd been together working through different things for 20 years. And our families had grown up together and we'd gone through ups and downs in our respective lives.
Sure.
So this particular issue, even though there was big dollars involved, did not supersede. And I'll never forget Richard's support in that way, because to me it just showed that, you know, if you do it properly and if you do it well, even if things don't go exactly to plan, it doesn't necessarily have to destroy your relationship there, just as it doesn't necessarily have to create an impact on your marriage relationship.
Yes.
Where you've made some decisions and your partner said, well, I trust you, you know what you're doing. And then you have to turn around and say, well, I thought I knew what we were doing and it's actually proving to be a lot harder and we're going to have to do this. And that to me is what a true marriage can bring to a situation like this, when particularly as I transitioned out of a big firm, moved into my own business, set it all up in 86 and 1987 we had the crash. Now, what I hadn't factored in is that when you have a crash like we had economically in 87, the things that you used to think would be work that would flow suddenly dried up. And it made things financially very difficult. My wife, went back to work, and she, in fact, earned more for about 5 years than I did.
Yeah.
To keep body and soul together with 3 children.
Yeah. Yeah, partnership.
Yeah. Yeah, different sort of partnership.
And John, how do you think that is through having those conversations with that person, like before you start a business, or do you think there's a way people can kind of equip their marriage for those types of things?
Look, I think it's a conversation you've got to have. The challenge I think you have is it depends on what sort of discipline areas your partner is in. So my wife's a teacher.
Okay.
She was at that stage high school teacher. She was on, if you like, child sabbatical. So in other words, she was not going to work while the kids were growing up to the point where they're at school. So the conversation, as you can imagine, was, well, this is going to be a bit tricky. You deciding you want to do this, but if it's what you believe you want to do, even if your father says you're stupid, I believe you should do it.
Yeah. Wow.
And I'll never forget that as being something that was amazing when things did get a little bit tricky.
Yes.
I remember Rupin talking about his situation when things were tricky and things, and you do too many things. You try to do this and try to do that and try to do something else. And your head is all over the place and you don't focus.
Yeah.
And the ability to focus was something that fortunately came through a circumstantial. I was asked to be a board member.
Okay.
So it was my first engagement as a public company board member. And it was in an industry that I didn't know anything about, but you could use the fundamentals. And I learned a lot. I then subsequently got onto other company boards. So from 86 on, my role really has been very much around mentoring, being on boards, taking the role of being a devil's advocate. I tend to be at times quite counterintuitive. So, people sort of say to me, well, is an accountant the right person to be involved in a technology company dealing with this sort of thing? And I say, well, possibly not, but, at least we can learn from it. I want to learn. So I've suddenly had to become much more, as we saw the other day, across the type of technologies, why they work, but more importantly, to then be able to talk to other board members and explain things in ways that they don't understand, but do need to be aware of if their company is going to benefit.
Yeah,
So
in terms of the numbers.
it means that the classic for me, I joined Honeywell as a business advisor back in 98. And after about 12 months, I was talking to a lot of the engineers and I was saying to them, guys, you forget that what you have as a solution or a way of being able to make a big difference for a client has to be approved by a board. That board is made up typically of full-time people that are in your space, probably a whole bunch of other people who are lawyers, accountants, and others who do not understand a word when you start talking to them in terms of acronyms. You talk to an engineer, he is immediately into acronyms. It's his nature.
Yes.
It's his DNA is to talk about da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And you sort of say, you do realize you're talking Chinese to me. What do you mean? It's simple. It's this, da-da-da. Those are the sorts of things that I don't know how we deviated onto that, but anyway,
that's fine.
It's something that for me is very important to get people to understand that we are the nature of our experience, and to be in a position where I had to talk to my wife about what I was doing in some cases was tricky, because I was explaining that I wanted to get into doing this and that and the other. And I got on board this company that was in health care. And she said, but what are you going to get on? You don't know anything about healthcare. I said, no, but there are principles that I've learned that I think I can bring to the table and be useful. And for me, it was talking to the doctors then to explain that they need to understand why they have got a business that is got lots of things going for it, but they need to be able to say and explain that to shareholders,
Yes.
because a lot of companies don't do that.
No.
They get on the stock exchange. They are not talking in words that are easily understood by shareholders. It's one of the biggest challenges these days of getting airtime in people's heads when they're so bamboozled with technology, what SMS is saying about doing this, this, and this,
Yeah.
da. How do you get into their heads? I haven't solved that problem yet.
John, perhaps for our listeners, you could explain to us or let us know, at what stage does a business need a board? Because I'm sure some of us out there have no idea when a board is required for a business.
I think basically you actually need some form of advisory group very early, a lot earlier than people are prepared to probably do it.
Sure.
Now, whether or not that's a fully fledged board where the directors have got all the obligations that go with it, but an advisory board of people, I think the sooner you can put one together that you can share where you're at, even if you're only doing a couple of 100,000 turnover,
Yeah.
it means that you've got an ability to bounce ideas around
So
and
important.
get second people's points of view. So from my point of view, sooner rather than later, whether or not it has to be the fully fledged business of having somebody appointed as a formal director, that brings with it obligations, as we all know. But for example, I got involved in a company that was on the point of basically being wound up, and what I saw was a whole series of opportunities based on the fact that the work that was being done, it was a software as a service, was actually being positioned into some very prestigious schools
Okay.
and used to help kids understand what they needed to do when they had to come out at the end of years 10, 11, 12 to try to get a job, right? And they don't get taught anything in that space as to how to research, understand what's involved in going for interviews, writing letters and all the rest. So they had developed this software. Now, initially, it required various approvals to be able to be done. Getting teachers to actually want to do something outside of curriculum is tricky because their curriculum is and their kids today have more things to do over and above what they do at school, whether it's sport, whether it's doing this, that, and the other thing, music. They have a bundle of things. But the point I'm getting at is that when she told me that there was a failure, I said, no. You need some advice. You need a group of people to help you be in a position where you can actually understand what you've developed and find different ways to pitch that into. So we ended up putting together 2 or 3 people to help her just understand what we needed to do to get the messaging out and not be frightened about the fact that, we're getting these people sort of saying no, leveraging the good things and the important things and why you're doing it, to lift her spirits to be in a position where, well, actually I do think that I've got something here after all.
Yeah.
Because it's that, very often it's that, just that little bit of support to say that, okay, it's hard work. We know that any business, when you start up, it never happens quite as you expect it. You never get what you forecast when you've written your mini business plan or whatever. But there are green shoots.
John, you're known for being calm, kind, and grounded. Where does this come from? Was this learned, or has it always been a part of who you are?
I was fortunate. I've had the experience of working across a range of different things. But if I go back to my childhood was in an environment where I had caring parents, quite removed in many ways, because my father had been in the Navy during the war, and it was not something he wanted to talk about very much. It was those typical days of, from his point of view, I've done what I had to do, it's over.
Yeah.
but I've read things about it afterwards to understand why he, amongst other things, ended up doing what he did. And that was quite unique in the sense that as a lieutenant on a minesweeper, during the after hours, he would be teaching members of his crew about business
Right.
in the mess. And I said, why?
Yeah.
He said, well, it was something that I'd got as a banker, and I thought, well, I might as well use the spare time for those people that want to, because the war will end and they're going to go somewhere.
Of course, yeah.
So I thought to myself at the time, well, that's interesting. But that sort of quiet wanting to do things flowed into me in a way that I didn't realize it until probably many years later. And it was actually when I took this decision to shift from a professional role into a high-risk role of starting my own business, that he balked at that, because he sort of said, look, I've given you all this guidance to do this, build yourself up. You came first to Australia as a 10-quitter like I did back in 1964. You didn't know what you wanted to do. We helped you get into what you ended up with as a career. Proud of all that. And now you're suddenly wanting to go and throw it all away. And it was probably one of the biggest challenges I had, was actually having to say to him that I'm not going to do any longer what was something that it didn't give me satisfaction.
Yeah.
But that early grounding was great. I was at a boarding school. In a boarding school, you become very much you have to survive in some ways.
So I've heard.
And I was thankful, in fact, that I had that, because to live and work with other people, get to know who the bullies were, make sure that you avoided them.
Yes.
Most of the time. And all that stuff was important. And then coming here, fortunately, as I've said to many people, the best £10 investment my father ever made was bringing all of us here in 1964.
Yeah.
40 quid to get us into this country.
Wow.
Amazing. And I'll never see anything like that as an investment, in my view, in my lifetime, as good.
Yeah. It's the same with my parents when they immigrated. They've done it 4 times, God bless them, but always trying to give us a better future. And I said to my mum and dad, like, that's something that I will eternally be grateful for, because I would have never had the opportunity that I have here. And it's, just the sacrifice that they made, the money that it cost them. Like, it was a lot more than 10 quid. But
yeah, well, that's right.
But honestly, like, the opportunity that it's given my brother, my sister and I, and I just don't think I could ever repay them for the future that they've given us. So, yeah.
And it's interesting, to my way of thinking, the way the country has grown because of the different people that have come in. Okay, in our era, it was after there had been a lot of people that had come here, Italians, Greeks as well, who brought with them the work ethics that they had, the ability to build things like Snowy, mountain authorities' work was all done largely by people of different ethnic backgrounds to Australians. And then you saw what happened after the change when the Vietnam War was over, and we had all these swarms of people coming in, and we're sort of saying, oh, all these refugee boats. But you would not have Vietnamese restaurants like we got now. And you would not have market gardeners like we have now without what was people coming into this country and seeing the opportunity, grabbing it by the throat and running with it. And I think the thing that I would encourage people to just sit down and do, which is I love doing, is talking to anybody with any ethnic background. And I do this all the time with my guys when I get an Uber. And I'll say to him, so how long have you been here, mate? Oh, I've only been here for about, da-da-da-da-da.
Yes.
You'd say, 8 years. Well, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And you get the history, the story from Pakistan or India or Somalia, and they are wonderful people when you sit down and talk to them.
Interesting conversations.
Yeah. But just make the effort.
Yes, definitely. John, how do you stay composed when you're under pressure? What's happening internally for you in these moments?
Look, I can blow a fuse just like anybody else. I'm not. My initials are NJC, right? The N stands for not. Do you get that? Not
Oh.
JC,
Oh, right.
right? So when people say to me, why do you do such and such? I say, well, just remember my initials, and I use them
Yes,
JC,
that's good.
but no, I'm not. I can't walk
Uh,
on water. I do have the normals. But what I do find, and I'm fortunate with this, is that if I get absolutely bent and twisted, it's usually for no more than 24 hours,
yeah.
because the brain has an amazing capability of sorting through stuff, giving you clarity, giving you things to think about the next morning that you sort of think, well, okay, I hadn't looked at that.
Yeah, so
and
true.
and and I say to people, look, if you're really getting yourself into a tiz about it, take time, take the day off.
Yeah.
Go and do something else. Walk, take a ride, do whatever. Have a good sleep, and come back the next day
Yeah.
and reassess where you're at. Have you solved everything? No, but you will have sorted things. Your brain will have sorted things for you in a way that most people don't realize that it does.
Yeah.
I was very fortunate when I first left the firm of Arthur Young. I early on got involved with a program that was run by a fellow by the name of Lou Tice from the US. And it was very much around understanding the power of the conscious and the subconscious. It was run by the Pacific Institute. I think they still run it. I've subsequently put my children through it. My wife went through it, because what it did is it just forced you to understand things like critical thinking and making sure that you put in messages to your subconscious,
Yeah.
program it, get it to be told these are the right things or those are wrong things. It also gives you the ability to realize that you have, like it or not, pink-coloured glasses. You need to take them off.
Yes.
Take them off and be prepared to understand that there is another side.
Always.
And those sorts of things, the power of the ability to understand that people that you think are hugely important and very difficult to be able to ever get to talk to are really not.
Yeah.
They're actually the very same. And he used the classic example of, you have two people coming to a marriage ceremony, and, they walk up she's already there, you walk up the aisle, you do this, that, and the other thing, and hand over. And there's this guy in his special little thing, and he's got maybe a hat on, or he's got certain other things. And here he is, and he says, by the power in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. He's a who said. And the who said now suddenly has an authority over and above what he normally is by the way we perceive it, certain certificates he's been given. But the bottom line, he's no different to you and me.
No.
But we have empowered him. Our mind thinks that he has got the super ability to now say, we're great. It's never going to be anything other than super.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because some of the guests I've also had, I'm like, oh my goodness, and I've got this person coming on, and I'm like freaking out. I'm so nervous. I'm like hyperventilating. And then my mentor always calls a spade, and he's like, Tracy, they still go to the bathroom. I'm like, just calm down. Oh, he didn't say those exact. That's very politically correct. I won't say the exact words he said, but it was like just a light bulb, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're actually right. So that really helped calm me.
I did the other thing that I did is Dale Carnegie course, which helps you with that, right? Because it's getting you to understand that, you need to be able to speak. You need to be able to preferably avoid the ums and ahs, and if need be, leave a gap before you actually say what you want to do next. The course was run. We all had to do a particular talk. So I ended up having to, and they said, we want you to do something and talk about something that is so irrational that anybody would just about laugh at you, right? So my topic was, I was the local president of the Flat Earth Society.
Right.
Okay. And I was talking to the rest of the team about that. And I had to be dead serious about this as being for real. And he said, look, if you're feeling uncomfortable, just remember when you're looking out at everybody there, just imagine that every one of them is wearing red underpants.
Yeah.
And he said, what it'll do is it'll make you feel that, you know what, you guys don't know what I know about you.
Yeah,
And there are so many little stories like this
there is.
that for me, I have this fortunate life of having had so many of them that they just roll out, and they mentally, subconsciously work for me very, very well.
Yeah, and it just kind of shifts your brain from that like heightened state of I can't do this to kind of like, just kind of brings you back down to earth, I find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the work that we do, what you have to think about too is that when you're trying to get people to understand technologies and things, you have to be able to understand that they've got mental blocks. They've got things that are their preference because that's the way the organization works or thinks. And you've got to try to work out how can you cut through, how can you in fact be in a position where you're giving high value thoughts for them to put in there so that they actually come back maybe later when something's occurred and they sort of think, you know what, if we'd had that, maybe we would not have ended up where we are right now.
Yeah.
So I'm a great believer that you're always what I call tossing out burley. You're throwing out stuff, hoping that it's going to be caught by somebody, a fish that will come to the surface, and sooner or later it'll jump out the water and jump onto your hook.
Yeah. John, has there been a really difficult decision you've had to make, if you're comfortable to share, of course, and what did it teach you?
Difficult decisions. I'm hard pushed to find anything that I would venture to say has been a super hard decision. Probably the decision to actually get out of one career into another. One of the earliest hard decisions was that when I came here from England, I actually wanted to be an architect.
Okay.
And I had a creative bent. So when I was at school, I was very good at art and woodwork and things like that. I was certainly very ungood at sciences and maths.
Same.
I was not too bad with English. And in sciences, the only science that I did any joy in was biology. So there were very different drivers when I first came here. And the difficulty was that to actually become an architect, you had to go to university, and I couldn't.
I see.
Because I hadn't got the right level. I'd come out before I completed, I was 16. I hadn't completed what we categorise in England as A-levels.
Right.
So I was not in a position where I could go to university. So ended up deciding to have to try to do something else, and finally ended up joining the public service in WA. And got a posting, believe it or not, with the police department, which was fascinating. So I did 2 years in policing in the sense of being part of head office, the administrative side of head office and policemen and all the tasks. And it gave me a completely different view as to what sort of things I would be interested in doing, but it didn't quite deal with the requirement that my mental side needed to be using my art features.
Yeah.
Which only really burst out for me in my late 30s, and I suddenly took up oil painting.
Oh, great.
But it was done as an adjunct to what I'd been doing all the time as an auditor, doing things which was very routine in the sense of historic analysis, not creative. But it was the difficult decision was that taught me you need to change. How do you do that when you're earning the sort of money I was earning, looking after 3 children, a wife who wasn't working at that stage? And that decision was probably a decision I had to make for my sanity.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to go out and create something.
Yeah.
Just similar to yourself.
Yes.
Doing what you did post-COVID, had to do something.
Yes.
And you needed change. And when you're doing that, what was I? In my late 30s, mid 30s, I suppose, with responsibilities, that probably is the biggest decision. Now I
Yeah.
think about it. Now you ask me that hard question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, do you think we undervalue kindness in business, and what's the cost of that?
Kindness in business is it's a word that probably is very hard to get built into the logic, thinking, and everything else of management and leadership, in the sense that both of those two areas are about trying to get people to use their talents, follow paths, do things that are necessary for the business, do things that are necessary, particularly for your customers, and be always mindful of the fact that you've got other people you have to work with, sometimes who don't do things well, don't meet your expectations, and consequently antagonize you.
Yeah.
So when you get those sorts of things, if somebody throws in, well, why don't you put more kindness into what you're doing? It almost is like, it's just counterintuitive to what you're really feeling at the time.
Yeah.
I think kindness to me is more about trying to understand that you can help people in their journeying by spending time with them and listening and talking. The best sort of kindness is to understand their predicament and try to give them help and assistance, like I'm doing at the moment with somebody who's I know has invested a lot of money in a project, is desperately trying to raise capital, has a high chance of it not being able to be achieved, and it would be easy for me just to walk away and sort of say, look, sorry, done what I can. For me, kindness is saying, well, look, I'm going to keep my ears open, go out there, door knock, people I know, see if there's anything we can do to help.
Yeah.
Knowing that there's only probably a 10% chance. To me, that is, in my world, is kindness at that level. But the other sorts of kindness, I think, are things that you say, well, what have you got as skill sets that you're prepared to put back in to community or to whatever for no other reason than you want to do it? And moreover, when you're going in and doing anything with people, whether it's going and buying stuff from your pharmacy or whether it's doing this, just be mindful of the fact that what people are doing there, in some cases, is boring. They don't want to do it. How do you make life a little bit more fun for them?
Yeah.
And how do you make their day? So my day would be to be, for example, someone you could just sense has just had a tough time. We've got a pharmacy, we've got an IGA, you dock in there, you buy a bar of chocolate, you come back here and say, hey, maybe that might help you today. What'd you do that for?
Yeah.
I just felt like it was a good idea to do something. So those sorts of spontaneous acts of kindness, which we talk about, are great. But as I say, within a business framework, it's a term that is sometimes overlooked because it doesn't fit the typical words that we use in the environment of business and everything to do with it.
It's interesting because I find the times where someone, there's particular people in my life just constantly so kind to me, and I always feel like I have to pay it back. I think it just happens, so-and-so's done something for you, or they've referred someone to you, or they constantly give you business. Like I always feel like I have to, it's that, I can never say this word, reciprocity, that I always feel like you just naturally want to be kind back. So it kind of works in both ways.
It does. It does. I'm a great believer that, anything you do comes back to you in double.
Yeah.
Somehow or another, right? And okay, you can you can say it's ESP or it's something else, but classic for me the other day, right, was that's a particular ring that my kids gave me for my birthday, right? Now, I was out gardening 5 years ago and I lost it in the garden.
Oh, yeah.
I got a gold sweep, tried to find it, nothing, no joy. 5 weeks ago, we had some gardeners in doing some work, right? And just as they were leaving, one of them, they're both Chinese, this guy came up to me and he said, his name's Chow. He said, John, this yours?
Oh, wow.
I said, Joe, that's amazing. Where'd
How
you
long has
find
it
it?
gone for?
He said, he was out there. I said, oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. So I pull out a $20 note.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, no. No.
Mm.
I said, yes.
Mm.
But for me, the kindness of that was he could have kept that.
You could have, yeah.
And made a lot of money out of it, solid gold, blah, blah.
Yeah,
right.
it's a
But
lovely
But
ring.
it's those are the sorts of little things that you do, and you know what you've done 4 or 5 months ago has come back to you in spades.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. John, how has being a husband and father shaped the way that you lead?
It's quite interesting because I was, at the time of our 3 children coming along, I mean, we got married and we had a tough gig in the first 12 months because my wife, on honeymoon, ended up tearing her knee, and we ended up in cast. She was in cast for the first, I think it was almost 3 months of our married life.
Oh, wow.
So we had a unit we couldn't use. We had to stay with my in-laws. Wonderful people, thank God.
Yes.
But it was not so much that was the leadership thing, but when the kids came along, I was at that stage a new partner, and I was having to focus entirely on what I was doing, and I left the leadership of the development of our children to my wife. And I couldn't have done better because she was a teacher. She knew exactly what and how to go about what she needed to do with 3 children. She got actively involved in things like school committees, and she did this all the way through up to high school. And it enabled me to delegate and know that the delegation was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it taught me a lot about delegation because when you think about it, your 3 children are probably I've talked to you about legacy.
Yes.
They are your legacy that you, at this stage of life, suddenly look back and you think, thank God she did what she did in the way she did it, because we now have this wonderful situation of 3 adults who were still, in our minds, children, because they never become anything other than children.
So I heard.
Who now have their own grandchildren for us. And to me, the leadership development that I've gone through was through the fact that if you do the delegation typically well, and if you think about why you're delegating and doing it in a situation where you watch it, but you don't try to override it, it works. It worked for me. It had worked for my parents. It had worked for my in-laws. And I see it working for so many other people that their leadership they don't understand is how they work together to manage those sorts of things, particularly children.
And John, if you could go back to your 35-year-old self and give yourself one bit of advice, what would it be?
Probably do the sorts of things you ended up doing because you have had a fantastic journey. You had had a fantastic journey up to that point, and the next stage will be a whole series of unknowns. But if you've had 35 years that have been solid and sound and useful, you can usually weather whatever comes in the next 35.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for the conversation. Where's the best place for our listeners to go should they wish to connect with you?
Probably the best place for them to go is to have a look at me on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Because I don't run a website as such. I have got other interests which are listed on LinkedIn besides my heavy involvement with RemSense, which is my absolute focus. But I have got and have been coaching, mentoring, and acting with other businesses, and some of those are listed there. And I use the LinkedIn model to actually get people to also see things that I think are important on that platform for things that keep coming up from time to time.
Yeah, it's a great platform for that, and just kind of sharing things that we find of interest as well.
Yeah.
John, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed our chat, as I knew I would. I really appreciate you being here today.
Tracy, thank you. It's been great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.